Deep in the moss-draped bayou, Elias pulled his worn canvas jacket tight, realizing the chilling silence wasn't the weather. It was the ghost of the tragedy that still haunted him. His only anchor was the heavy, silver and gray weight of Barron beside him. The fight against the Consortium wasn't for justice or revenge. It was a desperate, final act to prove himself worthy of the quiet, fierce loyalty that refused to let him break. The heat in New Orleans didn't just hang, it pressed. It was the oppressive, humid air of the Louisiana coast, thick with the smell of swamp mud, salt water, and the faint, sweet decay of old wealth. Outside the rusty aluminum screen door of his small rented cabin, the air shimmered, but inside, a profound, perpetual chill lingered. Elias sat at a worn mahogany desk, the wood scarred by countless water rings and cigarette burns. He was 42 years old, a Caucasian man whose face carried the deep lines etched by years spent staring into the dark corners of humanity. His short, messy hair was a stark mix of salt and pepper, matching the stubble that shadowed his jaw. He wore a faded red flannel shirt under a heavy, dark brown canvas work jacket. An absurd choice for July in the South, but it was a familiar weight, a reminder of the man he once was. He was a disgraced former federal investigator, now a private detective, specializing in cases the local authorities had conveniently forgotten. A low, resonant sigh sounded from the corner. Barron, a magnificent 5-year-old purebred German Shepherd dog, rose slowly. He was a large animal, his thick coat a striking silver and gray blend. His posture was inherently noble and watchful, yet his amber eyes held a gentle, unwavering loyalty as he approached Elias. Barron nudged the man's elbow, prompting him away from the stack of unsolved case files. "I know, old friend," Elias murmured, running a hand over the dog's broad head. "Fresh air, or as fresh as it gets out there." The new case was simple, at least on the surface: a missing person. Mrs. Elena Vance, a woman in her mid-60s, thin and dressed in outdated but respectable church clothes, sat opposite Elias, clutching a damp handkerchief. She was the activist's mother, desperate and weary. "Jesse wouldn't run away," Mrs. Vance insisted, her voice trembling. "He was fighting the permits for that new coastal pipeline. He knew something big." Elias accepted the meager retainer. Local law enforcement had closed the file on Jesse Vance 2 weeks ago, labeling it a voluntary disappearance. Later that humid afternoon, Elias drove his battered anonymous pickup truck toward the wetlands, Barron resting silently in the passenger seat. Barron was not just a companion, he was a tool of the trade, his senses sharper than any human could claim. "Show me, boy," Elias whispered as they arrived at the outskirts of the protected marshland, near a stretch of bayou known locally as the Dead End. Barron leaped out and immediately dropped his nose low, tracking through the thick, mosquito-laden air. The dog didn't just smell the general environment, he focused, his tail held low but steady. The scent led them away from the dry path toward the water's edge, where a forgotten, rusty anchor held an equally forgotten single-masted sailboat. Barron stopped at the boat, pawing insistently at the damp wooden deck near the small cabin. Elias knew the signal. Crouching, he carefully lifted a loose floorboard. Below, nestled among bilge water and mud, was not a body, but a piece of evidence: a shattered satellite phone and a small, water-damaged notebook. The notebook contained detailed logs concerning the Consortium's illicit diversion of federal coastal restoration funds into shell corporations, the true nature of their large-scale operation. Elias stared at the evidence, the chill returning, deeper than the heat outside. This was no longer just a missing person case. This was a war. The satellite phone was useless, shattered beyond repair, but the small, damp notebook Elias found under the floorboards of the sailboat in the bayou contained names, dates, and account numbers. The ledgers pointed relentlessly toward a single, towering figure in New Orleans society: Aurelia Dubois, known informally among the city's powerful as the Silver Lady. Elias knew he couldn't simply knock on the door of the city's most influential philanthropist. He needed an entrance. The opportunity arrived 2 days later in the form of a charity gala for coastal restoration, a bitter irony given the contents of the notebook. Elias traded his canvas jacket for the only suit he owned, an ill-fitting, decades-old charcoal number, and drove his pickup truck towards the Garden District. He parked several blocks away from the mansion, a magnificent Greek revival structure dating back to the 1870s. The driveway was clogged with luxury vehicles. Elias left Barron secured in the extended cab of the truck, the windows slightly lowered to catch the scarce evening breeze. "Guard the evidence, old friend," Elias told the 5-year-old German shepherd, scratching the silver and gray fur behind its ears. Barron settled immediately, his amber eyes fixed patiently on the front gate. Elias slipped into the party, relying on the practiced confidence of a former federal investigator to bluff his way past the nervous, inexperienced event security guards. Thin, young men in rental tuxedos. The mansion air was thick with expensive perfume, old wood, and the manufactured cheer of the elite. He found Aurelia Dubois near the fountain. The Silver Lady was an imposing woman in her early 60s, her silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, her silk gown the color of dark emeralds. Her demeanor was one of refined, almost regal authority. She held court with Senator Clay, a florid, middle-aged man known for his perpetual tan, and Mr. Sterling, a gaunt, humorless lawyer, both key figures mentioned in Jesse Vance's notebook. As Elias watched the trio, a disturbance broke out near the mansion's wrought-iron side gate. A large, heavily built man in a bespoke black suit, the head of security, was barking sharp, low commands into a hidden earpiece. This man's presence exuded a dangerous, lethal competence that stood out sharply against the event's frivolous backdrop. Suddenly, a frustrated, guttural growl rose from Elias's pickup truck, loud enough to cut through the street noise. Barron was on his feet, not barking hysterically, but issuing a deep, sustained rumble of fury. The dog was staring intently at the head of security. Elias knew that growl wasn't just a territorial warning, it was a profound, immediate signal of menace. Barron had detected a threat, a scent of violence and danger, confirming that this man was a professional killer. Elias felt the cold dread twist in his gut, realizing the depth of the conspiracy. He had to act fast before the head of security noticed the dog's intense focus. Elias approached the fountain, interrupting the Silver Lady's conversation. "Mrs. Dubois, I believe we have some unfinished business regarding the Vance case." Aurelia Dubois turned slowly, her expression freezing over. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Elias," he supplied, his voice level despite the adrenaline spiking. "And I think you do. It involves Mr. Vance and the coastal funds." The Silver Lady smiled, a sharp, mirthless curving of the lips. "I suggest you leave now, before my associates, who are far less patient than I, deal with your interference." The conversation with Aurelia Dubois, the Silver Lady, had been brief, yet it was a declaration of war. Elias spent the next morning sorting the meager evidence from Jesse Vance's notebook, knowing that the Consortium would move fast to neutralize him. He needed an advantage. The advantage came from an anonymous, encrypted message sent to his outdated laptop detailing a meeting point deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, a dilapidated hunting shack known for illicit cargo transfers. The message was clearly a lure, but Elias had to follow it. He needed confirmation of the criminal operation's physical location. He and Barron set out before dawn. Elias wore his heavy, dark brown canvas work jacket and durable blue jeans, the flannel shirt providing some barrier against the biting humidity. Barron, the 5-year-old silver and gray German shepherd, sat poised in the flat-bottomed boat Elias had acquired, his ears constantly rotating to catch the subtle sounds of the waking marsh. The air was thick and cold with fog, a heavy, low-hanging mist that reduced visibility to mere yards. The small boat puttered deeper into the bayou, past cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, their roots snaking into the murky, still water. The only sounds were the slow churn of the propeller and the distant chirping of unseen insects. Elias cut the engine when they reached the coordinates. He studied the reads. Too quiet. Suddenly, Barron shifted. The dog did not whine or bark. Instead, he dropped his entire body low against the hull of the boat, his tail pressed tight, his eyes fixed intently on a dense patch of reeds directly ahead. He issued a low, sustained growl, a sound like gravel rolling down a chute. "I hear you, boy," Elias muttered, dropping the paddle and pulling his sidearm from its leather holster. Barron was alerting him not to an animal, but to the unnatural stillness, the subtle human sounds of breath and movement that his master's ears couldn't detect over the fog's dampening effect. The ambush began not with a shout, but with the sudden metallic sound of a safety being released, followed instantly by the whiz of a projectile cutting through the air near Elias's head. Elias reacted instantly, plunging the boat sideways toward the cover of a massive cypress knee. He heard the splash of other boats, at least two, coming from either side. They were surrounded. "Stay low, Barron," Elias commanded. He knew he couldn't fight a gun battle here. It was all about strategy. Waiting for the pursuers to close the distance, Elias grabbed an abandoned length of rope and a rusty anchor from the bottom of his boat. As the pursuing boats drew near, their engines struggling to pierce the thick reeds, Elias lunged. He tossed the anchor and rope, successfully tangling the propeller of the closest boat and creating a chaotic, loud disturbance. While the ambushers scrambled to free their engine, Elias utilized the brief distraction. He reversed his boat swiftly, slamming it into the second boat's stern. The impact was enough to send one of the thugs, a burly man in camouflage gear, tumbling into the water, losing his grip on his rifle. Elias didn't wait to confirm the outcome. He steered the boat into a narrow, overgrown channel, slipping away from the ambushers and disappearing into the dense, disorienting mist. He had escaped, but the close call proved the Consortium was fully engaged. The boat ride back from the ambush site was agonizingly slow. Elias's ribs burned where he'd impacted the boat's rail during the evasion, and the humidity made the pain a damp, suffocating blanket. Worse than the physical ache was the realization. He wasn't just investigating a crime. He was fighting a fully mobilized enemy who had eyes everywhere, likely including the local authorities. He was officially on the run, a rogue agent in his own war. He abandoned the flat-bottomed boat and plunged deep into the wilderness bordering the Atchafalaya, finding temporary refuge in a seldom-used logging trail surrounded by thick stands of cypress. That night was the low point. The temperature dropped only slightly, but the air remained saturated. Elias huddled beneath a flimsy tarp, shivering from a mix of exhaustion, pain, and residual fear. He pulled his heavy dark brown canvas jacket tighter around his shoulders. Barron, the 5-year-old silver and gray German shepherd, immediately recognized his master's distress. The dog, large and magnificent, quietly nudged the tarp aside and curled his powerful body tight against Elias's side. Barron's thick coat and steady deep body heat, a pure biological furnace, began to warm Elias through the faded red flannel shirt. The simple physical act of shared warmth was a lifeline. Elias clung to the dog, burying his face in the soft fur. The smell of marsh and dog was grounding. It was then, in the absolute quiet of the bayou, that the memories came flooding back. The day in late 2016 when his former life was ripped away. He had been close to exposing a similar ring, a precursor to the Consortium, and the consequences had been devastatingly personal. He remembered the blinding rush of fire and the subsequent crushing silence. The loss had fueled the salt and pepper in his hair and cemented the weariness in his eyes. "I tried to let it go, Barron," he whispered into the darkness, his voice raw. "I came here to forget the shadows." Barron responded only with a soft sigh and a slight increase in pressure, his head resting heavily on Elias's thigh. The dog was his anchor. Without this fierce, quiet loyalty, Elias knew he would have drifted permanently into the apathy he fought so hard to escape. Hours later, long before the first hint of false dawn, Barron lifted his head sharply, his ears swiveling. His body stiffened, and a low, nearly subsonic rumble began in his chest. He stood up slowly, facing the deeper woods, his posture rigid and focused. Elias recognized the signal instantly. Trackers. They weren't alone. The Consortium had sent a team to sweep the area. Elias moved quickly, the adrenaline cutting through his pain. He grabbed his pack and whispered urgent commands to Baron. They didn't flee blindly, using Baron's continued alertness to gauge the trackers' slow, careful movements. Elias led them away from the path, deep into the thickest, darkest section of the swamp. He knew the jungle, but the trackers, relying only on technology, were blind to the quiet, organic synergy between the weathered man and his silver and gray guardian. Elias knew the survival game in the bayou couldn't last forever. He needed leverage that would instantly cripple the Consortium, not just fragmented evidence, but the financial ledger, the complete record of their illicit transactions and political payoffs. Jesse Vance's notebook had indicated its likely hiding place, the oldest structure in the parish, the forgotten St. Jude's Cathedral. The cathedral, abandoned since the 1950s but still structurally sound, stood like a stone mausoleum outside the city limits. Its architecture was heavy, imposing, and perfectly suited for keeping secrets. Elias and Baron approached under the cover of a dense midnight fog, the air cool and smelling of old stone and decay. Elias, in his weathered canvas jacket, found a service entrance leading to the crypts beneath the main altar. The air in the narrow stone stairwell was heavy and still. Baron, the 5-year-old silver and gray German shepherd, moved silently at Elias's heel, his footsteps muffled by the dust. They found the ledger in a vault hidden behind a crumbling fresco, exactly where Jesse's notes had predicted. The book itself was magnificent and terrifying, bound in fine leather, filled with tight, meticulously kept figures that accounted for billions of dollars and implicated half the state's political structure. Elias quickly began photographing the pages with a compact digital camera. As he worked, a low, unsettling whine started in Baron's throat. The dog's large body stiffened, and he began aggressively nudging Elias's thigh, pushing against the man's worn jeans with frantic urgency. The dog wasn't trying to leave, but to direct Elias away from the immediate area. "What is it, boy?" Elias whispered, momentarily annoyed. The urgency in Baron's manner intensified. The dog began pawing at the stone floor, and then desperately tried to push Elias toward a small, grated window near the ceiling. Elias suddenly felt a strange lightness in his head, a dizzying sense of disorientation that quickly became crippling nausea. The realization hit him. The air. The vault, sealed and rarely ventilated, was starved of oxygen, likely polluted by an old, unseen generator, or simply decades of stale, toxic air. Recognizing Baron's distress signal, a clear warning of immediate physical danger, Elias dropped the camera and threw his weight against the dog, allowing Baron to guide his struggling body toward the grate. Elias, coughing and gulping, used a small pry bar to force the brittle metal open, letting a rush of cool, fresh midnight air flood the small chamber. He staggered back, sucking in life-giving breaths. Baron stayed low, panting but watchful, confirming the danger had passed. Just as Elias secured the final images, a light flickered on at the end of the crypt hall. Standing in the yellow glow was Mr. Sterling, the gaunt lawyer Elias had seen with the Silver Lady at the gala. Sterling wasn't armed with a gun, but a briefcase and an expression of cold, professional disgust. "A ledger for a life, Mr. Elias," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "We know who you are. The Consortium will pay you to disappear, to restore your name. Think of it as a severance package for your conscience." He set the briefcase down, revealing stacks of fresh $100 bills. "Take the curse of the coins, or keep the curse of the truth." Elias stood tall, his hand resting on Baron's broad neck, the dog's warmth a solid reminder of his commitment. "I already lost everything once, Mr. Sterling. The truth is all I have left." Elias gripped the leather-bound ledger, its pages heavy with the weight of corruption. He had refused Mr. Sterling's bribe, but now he faced the toughest challenge, delivering the evidence to the only man he still trusted in law enforcement, Special Agent Marcus Cole. Cole, a veteran FBI agent, was stationed in Baton Rouge and had agreed to meet Elias in a public space in downtown New Orleans, hoping security would deter an attack. Fate, however, had other plans. As Elias and Baron, the magnificent 5-year-old silver and gray German Shepherd, approached the city, a fierce tropical storm began to lash the coast. The sky was the color of bruised plums, and rain hammered down with a deafening roar. Elias drove the pickup truck toward the designated meeting point, the city square near the old courthouse. He wore his heavy, dark brown canvas jacket zipped tight against the driving rain, the collar pulled up over his salt and pepper stubble. The storm was both a blessing and a curse. It provided cover, but the chaos was perfect for an ambush. Just as Elias reached the intersection, 3 dark, unmarked SUVs, driven by the Consortium's security, slammed into the traffic around him. They were moving to box him in. "Hold on, boy!" Elias shouted. He didn't fight them with brute force. Instead, relying on his deep knowledge of the city's winding streets and his desperation, he engaged in a high-stakes strategic chase. He veered sharply into the French Quarter, his truck's tires hydroplaning over the slick cobblestones, the engine groaning as he navigated the tight, centuries-old alleys. Baron was pressed low on the passenger seat, his eyes wide but silent, trusting his master's every calculated move. Elias knew he couldn't outrun them, so he opted for exposure. He drove directly toward the brightly lit headquarters of a major local news network, hoping the public visibility would make the Consortium's men hesitate. The chase culminated near the square. As the SUVs closed in, Elias slammed on the brakes, grabbed the ledger, and plunged out into the deluge. He found Special Agent Marcus Cole, a tall man in a dark rain slicker, his face etched with concern, waiting under the colonnade. The Consortium's men hesitated, unwilling to fire weapons in front of multiple news cameras that were already filming the storm. This gave Elias the crucial seconds he needed. He shoved the ledger into Cole's hands. "It's all in there, Marcus," Elias yelled over the howl of the wind. "The coastal funds, the corruption. Take it." The battle wasn't won by bullets, but by ink and truth. The evidence went public. The systemic rot that had created the Consortium was exposed, leading to widespread arrests among the city's power structure, including the Silver Lady. The octopus had lost its most powerful tentacles. Days later, the sky over Louisiana was a clear, brilliant blue. Elias's mission was complete, but he didn't stay to bask in the victory. He found no solace in accolades. He drove his pickup truck north, away from the coastal heat, his weary hand resting lightly on the broad, silver and gray shoulder of the 5-year-old German Shepherd beside him. Baron looked up at him, his gaze soft and knowing. The loss remained, but the burden of justice had finally been lifted. Elias had paid his debt, and he was finally, quietly, free to just drive. The storm has passed, the powerful have fallen, but the ultimate victory belongs to the quiet faith shared between 2 weary souls. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the companionship that anchors us when the world turns cold and the fight seems lost. If Baron and Elias's loyalty touched your heart, let us know below. Subscribe to join our pack, share their journey with a friend, and click the video on your screen now to continue the path to redemption.